While the world obsesses over the latest tech trends in Silicon Valley and Shenzhen, something far more consequential is happening across Africa. And if you missed what transpired in Conakry this year, you weren't just overlooking another summit. You missed the moment an entire continent quietly shifted direction. This isn't another story about Africa's potential. This is about Africa's present. By 2030, the continent intends to function as a single digital market. Not hopes to, not aspires to, intends to. And the machinery to make it happen is already in motion. The question isn't whether Africa can do this. The question is the rest of the world ready for what comes next? For those of us who've followed Africa's digital journey, we've sat through countless conferences, we've heard the speeches, we've read the frameworks, we've watched the PowerPoint presentations promising transformation. And yes, we've learned to temper our expectations, because words, no matter how eloquent, don't build infrastructure. But something changed at the 7th Transform Africa Summit in Conakry, Guinea. The atmosphere felt different. This wasn't another policy forum where officials recite aspirational goals while knowing full well that implementation remains years away. This felt like an engineering workshop, technical, urgent, and deadline-driven. Ministers spoke less about vision and more about timelines. Technologists presented prototypes, not concepts. And Smart Africa, the alliance coordinating this continental push, stopped behaving like a think tank and started operating like a construction project manager, overseeing multiple building sites simultaneously. The central message threaded through every session, sometimes stated explicitly, often implied in the way officials describe their work. By 2030, Africa will function as a single digital market. The language mattered. Not could function or aims to function, but will function. That shift from conditional to declarative represents more than linguistic choice. It signals a fundamental change in how African leadership approaches continental integration. What made Conakry significant wasn't just the substance of discussions, but the symbolism of location. This was the first Francophone West African city to host the Transform Africa Summit. That matters because it demonstrates this initiative isn't being driven by a handful of digitally advanced countries or a single regional bloc. Rwanda, Kenya, and South Africa can't carry this alone. For a single digital market to succeed, it must be genuinely continental, and the diverse representation in Conakry proved that this vision is taking root across linguistic, regional, and economic divides. When leaders from West, East, Central, Southern, and North Africa sit in the same room discussing digital identity protocols, cross-border payment systems, unified data exchange frameworks, and AI governance using the same technical vocabulary, you're witnessing more than coordination. You're seeing the architecture of something larger taking shape. Here's what struck me most about Conakry: the maturity. Africa has reached a stage where digital integration is no longer treated as an optional upgrade or a nice-to-have luxury. It's approached with the same urgency and necessity as electricity grids, water systems, and road networks. Nobody wasted time explaining why digital integration matters. That debate is over. Everyone in that room understood that fragmented digital markets create friction, limit growth, and keep Africa dependent on external systems. The conversation has moved beyond justification to execution. How fast can we build this? What technical obstacles remain? Which partnerships accelerate progress? Consider how specific initiatives were presented. Sonia, the platform connecting entrepreneurs with investors across the continent, wasn't described as a future possibility. It was presented as infrastructure Africa needs operational immediately. The SADIEX pilot project linking Rwanda, Ghana, and Benin wasn't introduced as an experimental prototype, but as a proven model ready for continental expansion. Digital identity frameworks weren't framed as coming soon, but as foundations being laid systematically, brick by brick. This isn't optimism. This is the confidence that comes from having moved past the planning phase into implementation. And that confidence didn't materialize from nowhere. For years, African countries pursued digital development independently. Rwanda became a leader in digital identity. Kenya advanced mobile money and fintech innovation. Ghana explored blockchain and interoperability. Nigeria invested heavily in startup ecosystems. South Africa built sophisticated cybersecurity frameworks. Each initiative had merit. Each showed what was possible. But these efforts flowed like separate rivers, full of potential but moving in different directions, sometimes even competing with each other. What Smart Africa has accomplished over the past decade is the patient, persistent work of redirecting these rivers toward a shared destination. A decade ago, Smart Africa functioned primarily as a forum for dialogue and declarations. Today, it operates as an implementing institution, coordinating technical integration across member states. When a country joins Smart Africa now, it's not signing up for more conferences, it's committing to alignment. And in Conakry, you could see how deeply that alignment has begun to take root. Look at how partnerships were framed. The collaboration with Youth Connex wasn't presented as a feel-good youth initiative. It was described as a talent pipeline, preparing millions of young Africans for the digital economy they are about to inherit. The Visa partnership wasn't celebrated as a corporate achievement, but understood as a strategic layer in emerging cross-border payment infrastructure. The Digital Solutions Framework linking Rwanda, Benin, and Ghana wasn't treated as a pilot program for show. It was positioned as the first building block of a continental identity system. This represents confidence born from alignment, concrete steps replacing slogans, technical specifications replacing aspirational language. One of the most significant shifts evident in Conakry was how African leaders now discuss digital sovereignty. A few years ago, this concept sounded aspirational, almost naive. Today, it sounds practical and necessary. African governments have come to understand a fundamental truth. Digital tools built by others come with limitations. Identity systems hosted on foreign servers, data stored in overseas data centers, payment systems routed through external networks, policy frameworks shaped by foreign priorities. These aren't just technical inconveniences. They are vulnerabilities that limit autonomy and create dependencies that can be exploited. Cybersecurity, once a peripheral concern, now sits at the center of policy discussions. Digital skills programs, once scattered and inconsistent, are being harmonized continentally. Even internet governance, an area Africa historically deferred to external actors, is being reclaimed through initiatives that strengthen local control and African decision-making authority. But perhaps the most important psychological shift is this. African leaders no longer speak as though the continent must catch up to Europe, Asia, or North America. They speak as designers of their own digital architecture, one that reflects Africa's unique population dynamics, economic realities, and developmental priorities. That clarity creates a different kind of confidence, not loud performative confidence, but the quiet certainty that comes from knowing your direction and having the means to get there. And once that clarity spreads across countries moving in the same direction, a natural question emerges. What does this actually mean for everyday Africans? Strip away the policy language, the partnership announcements, and the technical specifications, and the single digital market comes down to one simple proposition: making everyday life easier for millions of Africans who spend too much time fighting systems that should work for them, not against them. For decades, Africa's biggest digital problem hasn't been a lack of talent or innovation, it's been friction. Countless small obstacles that exhaust people and businesses. A company that thrives in one country gets tangled in bureaucracy across the border. A mobile wallet that works perfectly at home becomes useless in the next country. Government services require long lines, complicated forms, and frustrating explanations. The promise of a single digital market isn't some utopian fantasy where technology solves all problems. It's about systematically removing friction until systems feel smooth, reliable, and logical. Take digital identity. Today, moving between African countries often means proving who you are repeatedly. Different ID cards, new registrations, incompatible systems. A unified digital identity means you're recognized across borders securely and instantly. You don't think about it, it just works. The same principle applies to payments. Almost everyone on this continent has experienced the frustration of trying to send money across borders or purchase services from another African country. Why should a transaction between Lagos and Nairobi be more complicated than one between New York and Los Angeles? A unified payment system makes a phone number function as a continental wallet. What once felt complicated becomes ordinary. For small businesses, the impact multiplies. A seller in Lusaka shouldn't need to rebuild their entire business model just to reach customers in Harare or Johannesburg. A fashion designer in Accra shouldn't need 10 different platforms to serve markets just hours away by plane. When digital borders fall, the concept of exporting within Africa becomes easier than it's ever been. A local business can scale regionally without the usual burden of bureaucracy and cost. Then there's access to services. If Rwanda builds world-class digital public services, why shouldn't a citizen in Guinea benefit through interoperable platforms? Why should talent and opportunity be separated by colonial-era lines drawn on maps? But the biggest transformation is psychological. When systems work smoothly, people think differently. They plan further. They dream bigger. They move with confidence because the environment finally supports their ambition. That mindset shift, subtle but powerful, is what truly transforms economies. When a continent starts solving its internal problems at scale, the external world always reacts, sometimes with interest, sometimes with concern, always with increased attention. That's exactly what's happening now. For years, Africa relied heavily on foreign-built systems, payment rails, cloud infrastructure, cybersecurity frameworks, identity platforms, even basic software running government services. These systems weren't necessarily bad. Many provided real value, but they came with inherent limitations. Data stored overseas, rules written elsewhere, pricing controlled internationally, digital policies shaped with outside interests in mind. As long as African countries remained fragmented, these limitations stayed largely invisible. They're not invisible anymore. The moment African countries began coordinating digital identity, linking data systems, and integrating payment frameworks, the global tech landscape felt it. You can see this in how foreign tech companies now compete more aggressively for African partnerships. You hear it in shifting vocabulary, terms like collaboration, co-creation, and joint development appearing far more frequently. You notice it when major global tech conferences suddenly feature Africa in sessions that previously never included the continent. None of this is accidental. The world recognizes what a unified digital Africa represents, the largest young population on Earth stepping into a shared digital space. A market larger than the European Union beginning to form, an innovation ecosystem shaped not by external donors, but by African priorities. This creates mixed reactions globally. Some countries see opportunity. They understand that a stable, harmonized African digital market benefits global business, clearer rules, predictable systems, proper infrastructure. These actors are leaning in, seeking long-term partnerships, recognizing that Africa isn't a risk anymore, but a serious digital frontier. Others are more cautious. A continent that controls its own digital identity, data flows, and cybersecurity is less dependent, less influenceable, less vulnerable to external pressure. For decades, Africa's fragmented digital environment made it easier for foreign actors to operate country by country, shaping policies through bilateral deals that served external interests. A unified structure changes that dramatically. It compresses negotiation space and alters power dynamics. Some worry that Africa's digital sovereignty will make their strategic interests harder to advance. Others fear that as Africa harmonizes, it will gravitate toward partners who respect sovereignty more fully, particularly emerging digital powers offering infrastructure without political conditions. But the most interesting reaction is the quiet one. Global institutions beginning to frame Africa as an equal digital participant rather than merely a technology consumer. This shift is gradual but unmistakable. Africa is no longer discussed as a market to develop. It's being treated as a partner to integrate with. The world is adjusting, some eagerly, some reluctantly, but everyone is paying attention. Project Africa's current trajectory forward, even conservatively, and the continent in 2030 looks fundamentally different from what most people imagine today. Not perfect, not uniform, but coherent. And that coherence changes everything. Start with basics. A unified digital identity system across much of the continent means movement becomes simpler, verification faster, services less tied to geography. A person from Ghana authenticates themselves in Rwanda with the same ease as at home. A business incorporated in Dar es Salaam operates across multiple countries without reinventing its administrative structure each time. This may sound subtle, but it's the kind of infrastructure that quietly transforms how people live and work. The digital economy reshapes completely. By 2030, an African startup won't ask, "How do we enter a new country?" but rather, "Which part of our continental market should we scale to first?" That psychological shift is immense. When entrepreneurs feel the continent opening rather than closing, their ambitions change shape. You stop designing for a city or region. You design for a billion-person market. Payments will feel different too, not overnight, but gradually. Each year, more systems connect, more currencies integrate, more digital tools work across borders without friction. A baker in Dar es Salaam sells to customers in Lusaka without treating it like a complicated international operation. A freelance designer in Nairobi receives payment from a client in Abidjan with the same ease as a local transfer. This isn't theoretical. It's already happening in fragments. The single digital market simply scales it up. Governments will behave differently as well. Policy development won't be as isolated. If Kenya creates an effective AI governance framework, there's no reason that structure can't be adapted in Malawi, Guinea, or Botswana. If Rwanda develops robust cybersecurity protocols, they become continental templates. Instead of 50 different experiments running simultaneously, you get a shared library of working systems, each country improving what others have already built. The education and talent pipeline adjusts accordingly. Digital skills won't be taught only for local markets, but for continental opportunities. A young African learning software development, artificial intelligence, or cloud architecture steps into a job market spanning from Lagos to Kigali, Casablanca to Cape Town. Pathways widen, not because borders disappear, but because systems interoperate. Perhaps the strongest change in 2030 will be confidence. A continent that once saw itself through the lens of global dependence will act as a region shaping its own digital architecture. That shift, internal, psychological, cultural, may prove most transformative of all. When Africa activates its single digital market, the moment won't announce itself with fanfare. There won't be a dramatic declaration or celebration marking the transition. Instead, the world will gradually realize something fundamental has shifted. Africa won't be speaking as 54 digital fragments anymore, but as a coordinated digital force with momentum, structure, and leverage. That leverage matters profoundly. For decades, global negotiations involving Africa, whether concerning trade, technology, data governance, or investment, have been shaped by fragmentation. Companies could enter one market and use that foothold to influence others. Governments struck bilateral deals benefiting one state while bypassing others. Digital standards varied wildly, creating loopholes giving foreign actors more control than the continent often realized. A single market changes that dynamic immediately. When infrastructure, identity systems, payment frameworks, and data governance become interoperable, Africa gains negotiating power it never possessed before. Consider practical implications. A global tech company trying to influence data policy in one African country now faces a continent-wide framework instead of isolated national decisions. A foreign telecom operator can't play countries against each other for market access when licensing systems are aligned and harmonized. A payment company seeking dominance must integrate with a continental system, not just cherry-pick a few markets while ignoring others. The advantage shifts quietly but decisively toward Africa. Investors will feel this transformation too. Previously, entering African markets required navigating a maze of regulations, currencies, and disjointed infrastructures. A unified digital market makes investment more predictable, less risky, and far more scalable. Instead of funding a startup serving one city or region, investors back companies serving an entire continent. That alone transforms how global capital flows into African innovation ecosystems. Geopolitically, implications extend even further. Africa will no longer be viewed simply as a place where digital tools developed elsewhere get deployed. It becomes a developer, regulator, and potentially an exporter of its own systems. Countries that once approached Africa purely as a consumer market must adjust, recognizing that the continent now shapes digital norms rather than merely adopting them. And recognition comes with respect, the kind not given freely but earned through structure, scale, and coherence. Beyond infrastructure and economics, the most profound change may be psychological. Africans will increasingly see themselves as part of a functioning continental whole rather than isolated national economies. Young professionals will feel the possibilities of a borderless digital environment rather than constraints of narrow markets. Businesses will think continent first, not country first. Governments will approach policy with broader vision. And this collective mindset, once formed, becomes extraordinarily difficult to reverse. In many ways, Africa won't announce its arrival as a digital power. It will simply become one through consistency, through sustained alignment, through architecture built steadily over time. And when that moment arrives, when systems finally connect seamlessly, when borders soften digitally, when infrastructure hums efficiently across regions, one question will echo far beyond Africa's borders. How will the rest of the world adjust to an Africa that negotiates, innovates, and operates as a unified digital power rather than a fragmented collection of markets? Because at that point, the shift won't be approaching, it will already be here. So I'll ask you directly, do you believe Africa is finally ready to act as one digital market? After decades of talk, after countless false starts, after so much potential unrealized, is this time different? Which country do you think will benefit most from this transformation? Will it be the digital pioneers like Rwanda and Kenya who've laid groundwork? The demographic giants like Nigeria and Ethiopia with massive populations ready to connect? Or the quietly strategic nations building infrastructure while others chase headlines? Share your thoughts in the comments. And if this analysis resonated with you, if you want to see more deep dives into Africa's transformation that mainstream media ignores or misunderstands, subscribe to this channel and hit that notification bell. We're committed to bringing you stories nobody else tells. Stories about African culture, civilization, history, and the evidence of how glorious Africans have been and continue to be. Not the Africa of stereotypes and poverty narratives, but the Africa that's building its own future on its own terms. Because that Africa deserves to be seen, understood, and celebrated. Thanks for watching. Until next time, stay informed, stay proud, and stay tuned.